Hello and welcome to a live ET Career Talks. It's our attempt to help you reach your career goals through learning and mentorship. I'm Aloni Bhatt, and in this live session, we have a very special guest with us today. We have Naiyya Saggi. She's the co-founder of the Good Glamm Group, one of India's fastest growing and largest content to commerce D2C house of brands and founder of BabyChakra, a parenting platform. Naiyya, we are very happy to have you here with us to talk to us about lessons in leadership and entrepreneurship and how the road has been for you. Welcome to Economic Times.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Meloni. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you.
It's always a pleasure for us to have you at any forum. And to all those who are joining us, I want to tell you that, please put in your questions that you might have for Naiyya, and we'll take them along the course of this conversation. Now, Naiyya, many know that you're a Harvard Business School graduate, where you were a scholar, Fulbright scholar and a Tata scholar. You worked as a management consultant at McKinsey & Co. and at the Britspan Group in Boston, where you focused on scaling healthcare ventures. Not to forget that you're also a qualified lawyer from the National Law School in Bangalore. You also have a degree. So would you say that you were poised for entrepreneurship? How did your early experience, your learning and education shape you and what you do today?
Meloni, when I was growing up, I was certainly not poised for anything in particular as I think about it. In fact, I think I've shared this publicly before. I was a pretty poor student. So when I hear, myself of these brand names and, in the education space that I have now on my resume, it comes as a bit of a shock to even my system, not to mention my mother's. But I do think, growing up, I grew up in Calcutta. And, at that point in time, my mom was in the services. So there was a lot of, I think, always constant chatter about and a constant sort of, inspiration about doing something in service of others. And, if you really think about it, at the heart of it, entrepreneurship is just that. I think many entrepreneurs say we set out to solve a problem that we felt, yes, but eventually, if you're the only one getting the solution to that problem, right? It's not a business. It is not entrepreneurship. Eventually, entrepreneurs exist to be in service of others. So as I think back, I think my very formative conversations itself in being in service of others were perhaps the seed to entrepreneurship. I think the second thing that happened was, of course, McKinsey really shaped me, where I kind of learned that, law school was very idealistic and very sort of precedent-based. I think in McKinsey, what I took away was that business really has no rules per se in terms of being very structured and only looking at precedents to grow forward. Right? Of course, you have to be thoughtful. You can look at business learnings and insights to make your business work. But if you really build something innovative, something different, something scalable, you have to think very differently about business building and about the principles you apply. A lot of first principles thinking, a lot of problem solving toolkits that came into being, right? And I think very closely seeing the impact that business can have in shaping outcomes for people. So I think that really shaped my and was another very, very formative experience in me considering entrepreneurship as a career, especially when I saw a lot of CEOs very closely and firsthand.
Right, it's very interesting. But as a co-founder now of the Good Glamm Group, which happens to be one of the largest content creator commerce companies globally, share with us some of your insights on how you scaled, such a vast organization, especially because it caters to so many multiple verticals, and what would be the takeaways, for you that you have acquired while building this profitable and scalable business?
So Meloni, kind of stepping back, right? If you think about, and I'll give you a quick sort of 101 on those who may not be aware of the origins of the Good Glamm Group, right? The Good Glamm Group actually started as three founders coming together, Darpan of MyGlamm, Priyanka of PopXo, and me from BabyChakra, to basically say that, at a certain scale, the PopXo MyGlamm journey of content to commerce was really working. How do we replicate that experience across other verticals too, right? So the starting of the Good Glamm Group was three companies coming together, three founders coming together. I think what we were very lucky in doing, very fortunate, was over the next 18 to 24 months, we found a bunch of partnerships in other companies and other founders, right? Who believe in the mission of being a digital first FMCG conglomerate of the future. So I think that is really where the mission got shaped, the vision got shaped together. And just to summarize, I think the structure we have today, there are actually 4 pieces to what makes the Good Glamm Group the Good Glamm Group. The first is the good brands, which is all our product, the D2C slash sort of, challenger innovator brands, which comprises of My Glam, Momsco, BabyChakra, Sirona, Saint Botanica, Organic Harvest, across the spectrum of beauty, personal care needs. Then you have the Good Media Co., which has more than 200 million monthly active users across its media assets, BabyChakra, PopXo, Scoop, Boop, Tweak, and Miss Malini. The Good Creator Co., 1.5 million influencers under management and tracking all of them at scale, comprising of Bulbul's team, Winkle, Viduli. And of course, then you have the newest of the lot, the 4th vertical, the Good Communities, which has access to more than 20 million registered community members on WhatsApp. Right. And these are deep interest, hyper-localized communities. Right. So that's sort of the lay of the land. I think 2 things that have really helped us make method of like what could potentially be madness is as follows. One is, I think, a constant reiteration on our combined mission and vision, and really focusing deep on saying, okay, the digital first piece is our DNA. It's who we are. It is our biggest moat. And in everything we do, right, when we launch brands, when we run campaigns, when we think about, co-creating products, everything is digital first. Right, to start off with. And I think that's extremely powerful, very potent. So I think the digital first and the FMCG conglomerate of the future, I think that really hones in, going back to saying that how do we make things more efficient being digital first? And I can tell you more examples. The second is understanding that every vertical is autonomous. I think it's very important. And keeping it so, the leadership is autonomous, right? People are autonomous, right? And then they all come together at certain points in time as needed to collaborate. But on a day-to-day functioning, everybody has their goals, their KPIs, and they operate extremely independently. And I think that's super important because, of course, this has been said many times before in leadership jargon, but it's super critical that we hire people because we believe they're the best at what they do. Right. And to do the best at what they do, they need the space, they need the independence, they need the autonomy. So I think in a very complex structure, it's even more critical to have mission alignment, vision alignment, and to have autonomy with people.
All right. But, how do you build trust? Because obviously you have 4 verticals, 4 sets of people. And yes, there is autonomy, which is already baked into what they're doing. But then, how do you create that trust between the various teams and, how does that play out?
No, that's an excellent question, Miloni. And, again, for us, obviously, trust is an evolving paradigm, right? Because trust is so dependent on 2 things. One is the interpersonal dynamics between the leaders. See, if the leaders have trust, that percolates down to teams, right? When teams sort of look up and they say the leaders are basically operating in a way where they're taking risks together, they're making bets together, they're moving very fluidly, that culture of trust percolates down to the team. So I think trust starts at the very highest level, right? And the fortunate thing is that, of course, at the highest level, it's basically Darpan, Priyanka, me, and Sucleen and Sachin, right? So the 5 of us have come together to form the topmost layer, if you will, in a non-hierarchical way, but that's sort of the leadership layer, right? And we spend a lot of time together brainstorming what the strategy for the business, for the group, for people in our teams needs to be going forward. What's the right answer for our customers, right? So there's trust at that level. I think the second is structured trust. While you might rely a lot on interpersonal relationships, I think there's also very clear definitions of, norms and values and ways of working, right, that teams have to align with. One very core tenet we have is collaboration, right? So we do a 360 every year where we actually evaluate people on collaboration, not just in their internal teams, but also with multifunctional different teams across the group, right? So we look at exposure sets. Now, if you don't get a good rating because you're not collaborating in a trust-based manner, right, that actually impacts your entire evaluation, your appraisal. Right. So I think that is more structured. That is something, of course, the CHRO Karthik leads, but all of us as founders and as CEOs are very vested in ensuring that this actually plays out and is operationalized. In fact, so much so, Miloni, we are also subject to the 360.
Oh, okay. So it's not just the employees, but also the leadership, which,
Absolutely.
Makes itself vulnerable or, opens.
Accountable is how I would put it, right? Because we are also accountable to our teams and to the cross-functional collaborations that we are supposed to facilitate, right? And Miloni, this feedback is completely anonymous, right? So you really don't get to know, and you don't know whether it's someone in your team or someone in another team or someone who you're working with as a peer who's evaluating you. You get the combined feedback results. So I
Right.
think that's a very strong mirror and a very strong structured approach to ensuring trust-based collaboration across multiple verticals.
All right, it's fascinating, but your journey, being part of McKinsey and other companies that you were part of, how much of that kind of seeped into the structures that you've set out now, or is this a completely new dynamic? And of course, there's deep collaboration, obviously because you have so many brands that come together and operate.
I think it's a really good question. And I'm going to call out two parallels, right? So actually at McKinsey, we used to have the 360, which is where, seed of that idea actually came from, right? Because we'd see partners, directors also at McKinsey being subject to the 360. And, we kept on saying at McKinsey, we're a non-hierarchical firm, right? And we had an obligation to dissent in case we felt something was off in the way we were working or something could be better. And,
Right.
anybody, even an analyst could speak up in a meeting, right? There was that much, I think, I would say just an obligation to do the right, the answer could be right and it could come from anywhere, basically, right? So I think that obviously stays with us today as we think about the structures we're building at the Good Glamm group. But I do think that, from my time at, let's say, doing a much earlier to mid-stage venture at BabyChakra to where we are today, which is, a 3,500 people organization at corporate, right? I think I've seen a lot of difference in the structures there in terms of even things like, what I'm realizing more and more is people need at a certain stage, you need generalists, right? At certain stages of a company's evolution, you shift to wanting more specialists, right? At a certain stage, you need people who will come in and, could be freshers and could, come in and take on any problem if they have the right sort of problem solving skill sets. At a certain stage, you need very strong technical expertise. So I think in terms of the way we're building out our teams and the kind of mix of generalists and specialists, I think that ratio has changed a lot. I think that's one big difference in the team structure. I think the other big difference in the team structure is actually over-indexing more and more on communication. When you're a smaller team, it's easier to communicate, or word spreads, or you have informal channels that get created, right? And in a small structure, it's always, it's a lot more. You can identify your culture carriers much easier, right? In a larger structure, you have to put in that inordinate extra effort to really identify, one, your culture carriers, number two, really nurture them, and number three, really celebrate them, because to really have culture percolate, you need these culture carriers, being the ones that we celebrate very explicitly across the group as the kind of cultures we want to embody in the way we do business or the way we treat our teams or the way we work with our teams, right? And of course, communication, over communicating, I think that gives people a lot more comfort, especially I think in such turbulent times globally.
All right, it's very interesting, and I'm so glad you spoke of culture and the fact that the leadership team itself, plays a greater role. And you said over-indexing on communication, so obviously communicating it at all level and ensuring that there is a seamlessness when it comes to the messaging. You spoke of turbulent times today. From your vantage, when it comes to leadership, what are some of the critical qualities that you think are required to be a successful leader and entrepreneur? We have people who are joining us, and these are all, early stage career professionals or mid-stage career professionals. Especially now in India, when you have so many young people who are embracing entrepreneurship as a career option.
Miloni, at the heart of it, entrepreneurship is a people's business, right? I mean, who are the people you're managing? One is your customers. You're basically, like I said, entrepreneurship is to be in service of customers and scaling that service out, right? Number two, your teams. Number three, your investors, right? And number four, yourself. These are the four sort of people at the heart of it that you're managing as an entrepreneur, right? So I think what I've realized, I think in this journey of entrepreneurship and what I see play out well is, one is that I think as an entrepreneur, you keep on learning more and more. And I think to be keeping yourself open to learning more and more about these four stakeholders, what matters to them and why, right? And how can you serve them best? Spending time with them and making the time, very explicitly with each stakeholder, by the way, including yourself. You see, the entrepreneurship journey, Miloni, sometimes we forget ourselves, right? And I think if you are not spending time with yourself, maybe once a week, carving out that moment of like 3 hours, 5 hours quiet time with yourself to say, and evaluating yourself, right? Saying, okay, where did I reach? Have I got to where I wanted to get to? What more can I be doing to, grow myself and to grow the business out, to grow my teams out, right? Then you're not sort of investing in the fourth stakeholder, which is you, right? In entrepreneurship. And of course, I mean, I think it's been said enough, but I cannot emphasize how important it is to spend time with your customers and with your teams, right? That I think is never time wasted. I think a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to do this customer conversations again, or, spending time with team is it a meeting? And, am I wasting time? But no, if you're spending time in very constructive, very well structured one-on-one, feedback time, as well as some unstructured time, right? Where it's a lot more open, the conversation, a lot like loser, it's a lot more freer, right? That's when you really get the sense of what matters to your customers and what matters to your team. And your only most critical job as leader, right, is to ensure that they are happy, that they are fulfilling their potential, that they're playing to their potential. I think these are the four stakeholders you have to keep in mind. Of course, investors is absolutely critical. If you're raising money, you have to make your investors happy. You have to give them the outcomes that you've committed to them, right? So I think these four stakeholders is really where it boils down to as an entrepreneur, and managing them, keeping them happy, keeping your ear on the ground on what is keeping them ticking and keeping them growing, and constantly learning and spending the time learning more about what matters to them and why.
Right, but being one of the first South Asian DTC beauty and personal care brands to achieve unicorn status, is a remarkable achievement. But, shed some light on some of the significant hurdles that you feel entrepreneurs in this DTC beauty and personal care space often encounter. And for some of, those aspiring to get into business, could you walk us through how your team maybe overcame some of the obstacles, and any advice that you'd have for someone facing similar challenges?
Sure. I think, Miloni, everybody recognizes this. The D2C space is super exciting, right? People have given all sorts of numbers, 1.2 trillion, whatever it might be, right? And beauty, personal care itself, being about 30 billion. So, we can do the math. It's a large space. I think the biggest challenge is actually breaking through the clutter, for any beauty personal care brand, right? And I think this is where the whole sort of having a very strong digital first approach and having a very strong consumer community centricity approach really matters. So of course, we cracked, I think, the first piece of the puzzle of breaking through the clutter and ensuring consideration and top of funnel awareness through our content stack, right? The content stack really helped us reduce our CACs substantially in a way where we could really go to market and claim that we have the lowest CACs in the industry, right? And hence, like our, at a unit level, right, we were not burning money in acquiring customers, which is one of the biggest problems you face as a beauty personal care player, right? But the second piece is that once you've acquired top of funnel, or once you've even acquired the customer, right, how do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them retained? And more importantly, how do you get them to become evangelists for you? I think that sort of piece is what we are cracking with communities as we speak, right? Where we're actually tapping into more than the 20 million, community base we have across beauty, personal care, mom and baby, hair care, organic care, menstrual hygiene, right? These deep interest communities with good communities. And we're actually leveraging our existing customers as number one, co-creators of our products with us. So we know really what they need, right? And we can preempt and go to market much faster with relevant products, which are customer co-created. And number two, have them become evangelists of our brand. And, Miloni, 85% of people, right? And this is as per surveys, right? Trust the recommendations of a peer.
Yeah.
More than they trust the recommendations of any other sort of, celebrity or influencer or what you see on TV, etc. Right? If a peer who you trust tells you this is a great product, you will try it. So I think the community stack is a very strong way for us to break through that clutter and to really create and scale trust through our existing community members and customers as evangelists. So I think these two things have really are really working for us and are really helping us as we speak today. And that's one of the biggest problems D2C brands and in general face, right? I think the second problem, of course, they face is of distribution. And I think while, of course, everybody's talking about omni-channel today, and that's an important way to scale, eventually, I think it boils down to saying that where do you own the customer, right? And I think that's, again, the D2C stack that we've been able to create at a group where we see about 60% of our sales coming from a D2C stack, I think is extremely important because it gives us proprietary data and information on every purchase made. right? Versus, I mean, of course, marketplace partners and offline partners are a very critical part of our overall partnership and journeys. But I think having this amount of data, this amount of insights, this amount of then therefore from that retention, repeat ratios, right? Also like an understanding of our customer, I think that is one of our strongest moats. And that is something I think a lot of brands try to replicate. Not so many brands have been able to do that at scale. Right. And I think that's where if you look at even DRHPs, people will say one of the biggest risks we have is that we have a lot of preponderance of our sales on marketplace channels, for instance, right? Where there is arguably a lesser amount of visibility into who your customer is, right? So I think that is a big, strong moat for us. I think that's a big sort of play that we've been able to build our strength on. And that's, of course, facilitated through data, tech, product, growth, etc., right? The entire stack there. And I think the third piece to it is obviously constant product innovation, right? Across, if you think about our portfolio of brands, the other problem, beauty personal care brands face is that while you're incubating products in your company, in your group, or, in your stack, very few of them are able to reach scale, right? I think what's happened as a result of some of our inorganic acquisitions as well is that, of course, when we got them, they were already at a certain scale stage, but we were able to galvanize that scale by more than 400% in the last 6 to 8 months using, the D2C input. And therefore, now you're looking at a stack of 5, 6 scaled brands, right? Yeah. And I think that is, again, another big part of basically saying now we're a meaningful part of the overall beauty personal care ecosystem versus being a one-horse player in the game.
Yeah. And there's a very interesting question that has actually come in for that. This is people who've written into us over email. And one of the question is, how do you forecast an innovation? How do you know that this product's going to make it?
I think it's a great question. So, of course, one we have an amazing new product development team that is super passionate about the products we're building, right? And I think they basically look across all our portfolio companies and brands and basically keep their ears in the ground. So we have dedicated sort of spokes for each portfolio company, and they look at trends externally, globally, like they're looking at what is sort of working, not working, right? They also, of course, track digital trends, that is obviously, I think, something that they look at. They look at ingredient stories, formulation stories, format stories, right? I mean, cleansing oil to foam, was at one point in time like the big thing, for instance, right? Serum, which is, which is foundation, but also skincare, big deal, right? All of that. Yeah. The second thing, however, that's super unique about that, if you remember what I talked about community, Miloni, right? Every month we have more than 700 to 750,000 people filling in a survey that we do, plus having conversations with us, which is even more about the kind of products they want to see us launch in the market across mom and baby, across beauty, across hair care, etc. I think that's where the power of communities really comes in, right? And then we also ask them, right? How does this ingredient sound to you versus this ingredient? We ask them literally packaging, FOP, FOP of this product versus FOP version 2 of the same product, BOP of this product versus back of pack of the same product, but like version 2, pricing. We just do this at scale with them. And I think that gives us feedback from the person who's eventually going to buy them or evangelize them or refer them to someone. So I think that gives us, an added innovation and a faster go-to-market than normally we would get if we were just, going to the same motions of doing regular consumer insighting.
Well, this is just simply fascinating because it's actually, as you said earlier, where you have, your communities co-creating that product and actually then, being part and evangelizing that product for you. So, this is very, very interesting. I'm going to go back to the macroeconomic climate now, Naiyya. It's looking bleak, right? So in this kind of an environment, how is your business, or how do you think business leaders can establish this environment for innovation? Because often that will take a back seat, when you're trying to fund so many other things, keep the business going, pay salaries, all that, something that enables their organization to adapt, to thrive in the space of a business landscape that's ever changing.
Miloni, I think the time that we are in right now is actually very interesting, actually a very, I think it's a big opportunity for us as business leaders and as teams to really go back to the drawing board and identify what is core to our growth and to our business, and to what value we are creating for our consumers, for ourselves, for our stakeholders, right? So I think that the team has done at this point in time. And I think the outcome of that has actually been very, very positive, right? Which is that, I think as a whole company, right, we've all, and of course, as founders, we've pretty much dedicated ourselves to saying that we will focus on profitability, right? And yes, maybe some growth in some cases, in some verticals may take a hit, but that's peace and that we will live with that. I think the important thing is to focus on profitability, because eventually what we're all gunning towards, right, is a public offering, right? And the markets will demand that of us. More importantly, we will demand that of ourselves, right? And I think it's not very far out that we see that happening with us as well. So I think that is really, what I think overall, I think as an ecosystem and seeing that play out has really also helped us, kind of align the teams as well to ensure that everybody understands that this is the right mission to go after. It's the right answer to go after. And maybe, with a very sort of heady market, maybe that would have gotten pushed out by a few months here or there. But eventually it was always going to come back to this profitability play, right, that we wanted to get into and be very extremely cash rich by the time we hit public markets. So I think it's actually a good time for us to, first of all, go back to the drawing boards, reconvene our teams, really identify what's core to us, what makes sense strategically, medium, long term, right? Really go back, reinvest in that actually, and then really focus all our efforts on driving to profitability and driving to team alignment around it.
All right. But, talk to us about how you take some of those tough decisions, right? As a business leader, as an entrepreneur, how do you ensure that road to profitability, is a steady road, is the one that everyone is also has a buy-in into?
Well, only it boils down to the same piece I talked about earlier, right? I think it's about over communication, especially at this point in time. I think a constant communication on why profitability matters, right? How will we achieve it? Being clear about it, being transparent about it with our teams, of course, being upfront and, having, the council of our board members in as well, because they would also have oversight into what is happening in different contexts, right? I think it's just about bringing that entire construct together, that narrative together, and ensuring everybody is aware of that narrative. I think that is the one piece perhaps a lot of us miss out on when we are working on something which is as mission critical as this, right? So I think just really over-indexing on transparency, over-indexing on communication, I think is the biggest part to it.
Okay. Naiyya, this is my last question to you, but we have a lot of questions which are coming in. And this is, as an entrepreneur, and as a woman leader, has there been a strategy or has there been a need for you to combat gender stereotypes in your professional journey? Anything that you could share with our audience, especially with young and aspiring females?
I think, to put it bluntly, I do think bias is real. It exists. And, it's not useful to beat around the bush about it because it's there, right? And we see it, and not just me, but other entrepreneurs who are female face it every day. There's also, I think, this constant nagging doubt about, I think because with that bias comes that, bit of that weight on your head on whether you are actually capable, because if so many people are, looking at you a certain way, you start questioning your own ability at times, right? And I think the only two things that have worked for me is, constantly telling myself that nothing succeeds like success. I tell every person I meet the same thing. And I think it works, right? Because when you're at it, when you're determined, when you're resilient, when you're really ambitious, and you don't let any of this noise get to you, and, when you kind of hopefully become successful, I think that paves the way, not just for your narrative to play out and for people to take you seriously and hopefully look at you with a less gendered lens, but more importantly, for the folks who are younger than you or coming up their careers or coming up that ladder after you, right? They use that as inspiration. So I think it's important. It's actually like our responsibility to be successful, right? And I look at it that way. So that's one big part of it. I think the second part of it is also to call out biases as you see them. Many times you're like, oh, it's okay. Like, I don't want to be too bossy. I don't want to be too aggressive. I don't want to be perceived as aggressive. Eventually, you're not here to, waste anybody's time, including your own. You're here to build something which impacts a lot of people at scale, right? So I think it's important to be extremely transparent with people who may be holding you back with their biases, or team members who may look at you with a different lens because, you're a woman leader, and to call it out and basically have that conversation with them one-on-one and explain to them that behavior like this is not going to be tolerated, not going to be acceptable, and this is who we are. This is what you get. So I think having conversations with people and subtly calling up some of these are unconscious biases too, right? So giving them the benefit of doubt and having that called out, I think really helps also change the narrative within the organizations that you're working in and the people you're working in.
All right, I think this answers Shrital's question. She's from Microsoft Bangalore because she had asked, how do I overcome imposter syndrome that I frequently encounter, especially when being part of an all-male team meeting, that I can unlock my potential for success. But there's something that you said, Naiyya. You said nothing succeeds like success. The point is that, up to the point that you're successful, there's a big road, right? And especially for women, that road is hard. Any tips, anything that you would want to tell, people like Sheetal?
So Sheetal, been there, done that. So more power to you. I'd say, I think just two things. One is that, many times we look for mentors, and I keep on telling people, look for sponsors, right? Look for people who you're actively cultivating very strong trust-based relationships with. Tell them your dream, tell them what your ambition is, and have them espouse your cause and your name and talk about you or talk about what you're building or nominate you for things in settings where you probably today don't even have access to. I think that's super important because, obviously we're all growing in our careers, right? And I've seen this before, Arihan Patni, who was one of my angel investors, right? The way he'd espouse me with venture funds when, even when I was not fundraising, but when he'd talk about me and I didn't even know about it, right? It wasn't like I was telling him, hey, you're going to meet that venture fund, please talk about me, right? But he would do it. So I think there are many people like that you have to find, nurture, and really cultivate that relationship with and, count on them to have sponsor you. Right. And there'll be opportunities that will open up that you would not even have had access to today because you're not part of those circles, but they are. So I think that's a very, very important part of things and of like really moving forward. I think the second piece to it is, I oftentimes think that, we are actually in a society today where we have some amazing men as partners with us. Right. I mean, I gave the example actually just coincidentally of Arihant, but like similarly, I've had a bunch of amazing male teammates, male investors. Even today, Darpan is a male co-founder to me, right? I have teammates in my team who are men, right? And I think we'd be surprised by how much they actually are motivated to support all of us and make us successful.
Championing all the women in the team.
They're backing the women in the team. I mean, looking at you as a team member, they want to have successful, right? So I think having those conversations with them and basically, maybe in that all male team room, maybe having one-on-one equations with some of them and, making them, once you see them as friends, right? Or once you see them as partners or allies, I think the dynamic itself changes in a conversation. And many of them are extremely well-meaning. I mean, they probably have partners like you or sister, I don't know, like, people like you who are facing the same problems are talking and confiding to them about it at home for all right? So I think have that conversation with them.
All right. See, Naiyya, we've got a lot of varied questions from a whole host of people, and they're like all over, traversing all sorts of landscape. Now, this is one from Harry Costato, who asks, by all counts, you're successful. Do you feel successful? How would you define success? How do you think success will look like in 10 years?
I mean, extremely philosophical question, Harry, but I think it's an important one, right? And I don't know if I'm successful today. Sorry, there's a bit of light from the sun outside, but I don't know if I'm successful today because, I don't think, most of us basically keep on looking for the next milestone, the next milestone, the next milestone, right? I think just one big, learning I've had over time, and I think maybe that's come from my last couple of years, right, is that was I able to get better than where I was last month, right? Yesterday, right? Was I able to manage my emotions better? Or was I able to achieve something that I didn't think, even a personal milestone, right, that I think I could have done last month, right? So I think that's how I started perceiving success, because otherwise there's no end to it, right? It's a bottomless like pit, right? You just keep on saying this milestone, next milestone. So I think just looking and, I think really internalizing that you're really on this race of success for yourself and with yourself. And are you improving day on day, week on week, month on month? That's one. But I do think that 10 years from now, my real dream, Harry, would be, and I've said this before as well, I think it's a very beautiful time to be an entrepreneur from India and building in India. And, there is an opportunity before us at the group to really take this group and to imagine products and brands from India global. So, 10 years from now, if, I'm in, let's say, the US, or if I'm in the UK, or if I'm in Australia, or if I'm, anywhere in the world, right? If I see the products from our group, and if I see all the assets from our group in the houses or in the shops, or in the stores of these international, in these countries, right? I think that would be really strong success for me, because then we've truly achieved our mission of building from India for the world.
Mayur Bhuva writes in from Vadodara. How do you identify opportunities for diversification?
It's always very strategic, Mayur. I think what we look at, sorry, I'm just going to close the curtains. It's easier. It's always very strategic. And I think, what we end up doing is we take a step back. We work very closely with our board. We work very closely with our teams to identify areas of true opportunity for us and true complementarity for us. Of course, some of them are bets, right? I think when, and this is to Darpan's credit, right? When I think he made the bet on content to commerce working, it was a very counterintuitive bet at that point in time. Today, it's obviously played out. So I think we look at that entire strategy, and, we've already got a set of fleshed out portfolios, if you will, and strategies around them, right? So we, of course, have the brands, and the brands have their own strategy across different care types and care protocols. We recently also announced our JV with Akshay Kumar, if you may recall, because now that's our foray into male grooming and personal care, right? We have our own strategy on media, on creator, on community assets, right? So then we basically look for plays which kind of feed into that as much as possible. I think the other part to our strategy is basically identifying what are the international markets that are of interest to us, right? Where you sort of see a very strong complementarity and a very strong, almost like a pull for our products, and where we have a right to win. So that kind of sets our geographic, strategic, outcomes in perspective. So I think that's how we really think about strategy. I think it needs to fit in with where we are today and where we want to grow further on and accelerate.
Right. Jitendra from Godrej Infotech in Mumbai is saying this. Namaste, Naiyya. Is EQ only important, or is spiritual quotient also necessary for a leader?
I mean, that's a great question as well, Jitendra. I can't claim to to be very spiritual, unfortunately, today. But I do know of a lot of leaders who are very into, and if you could call it meditation, for instance, and also holistic living. I think of spiritualism a little bit differently, and I go back to the impact piece I started off the conversation with Miloni on, right? I think as entrepreneurs, you have a beholden responsibility to do the best, right, for your customers, but also for your teams. If you really think about, who you're accountable to. And I think what therefore gives me, I think, a lot of peace and a lot of, I think, comfort with the way I'm living my life is if I close my day and I say, did I do my best by my teams? And did I do my best? And did I put in my best for my users, right? So, I mean, that's not spirituality, I get it, but that's what gives me a lot of peace and a lot of, I think, satisfaction. I think it makes me feel more closely aligned to the mission we are all on.
Right. That's a great response. We have Shankar from Bangalore, and he's asking for for you to put on your managerial hat. And he's saying leadership at mid-managerial level gets very tricky to handle both sides. On one side, you have leaders with their stretched expectation, and at the same time, you have to manage your team below and keep them motivated. So can you share some thumb rules for mid-managerial leaders in such cases?
So I'm going to call upon and drop on the experiences I've seen of my most successful team leaders who are managing and probably in a similar situation, right? And because to put things in context, I was an analyst at McKinsey and I went on to become founder at BabyChakra. So I never really had the mid-management learning, unfortunately, right? So I've learned a lot from my teams, right? On how to manage stakeholders and manage expectations. Two things I've seen my most successful managers do very, very well. Again, I think one is, of course, communication, right? Upwards and downwards, and having the relevant, it's almost like a toolkit. In McKinsey, we were taught communication is actually a toolkit that you have to master. And communication can take on the form of written communication, oral communication, problem-solving communication, brainstorming communication, it's meeting communication, right? It's actually it's a structure that you have to pick up. It's actually almost like a muscle you have to learn, right? So I think that's the first piece to it, being very, very strong in communication, because that actually gives a lot of comfort on your abilities as a leader to both your junior team members as well as your manager yourself, right?
Yeah.
The second piece is to build a lot of trust with a lot of structure, right? But also ensure autonomy. So how do you build trust? It's not about basically saying, oh, let's go out and network or go out for drinks all the time, right? It's about actually being able to promise and deliver on what you commit and what you can commit on. So in the beginning, when you're signing up for targets, be realistic about them as much as possible. And I think, and deliver on them, right? I think there's no other answer than to deliver on targets, right? And of course, I think if all your processes, and I talk about structure, right? If all your processes, your input processes are all in place and they are very clearly shown to your junior team that these are the pieces you play, and to your senior management, these are the pieces I will be playing and my team will be playing, right? Sometimes when you don't hit your numbers, when you don't hit your targets, right? It's okay, because everybody knows that the process of doing it was well thought through. Everything was executed and operationalized as per plan, right? And there was a method to the process that was carried out, right? So I think that transparency is an extremely critical part, along with that, for building trust in how you deliver results.
I think that answers the question. We have Sushil Nahar, and I think Naiyya will take one or two questions more because we have to be mindful of the time. We have Sushil Nahar, and his question is, how do you handle differences of opinion with your co-founders?
I think what we do is we talk about it. And some of these may be happening with the three, like we could talk about a certain difference of opinion amongst the three of us, and we brainstorm. I think the second way is to do one-on-ones and figure out the best solution. I think the important thing, however, is to keep communication channels open, right? And if I don't know what is troubling you, or what you don't align with, or what we don't agree with, right, then together we can't solve for it. So I think it's super important. And I think the second principle, of course, we agree on is that once we agree on something, once we align on something, even if we disagree, right? But once we agree, we all leave the room saying that it does not matter if I disagreed or he disagreed or she disagreed. We've all aligned on this. We're going to go out and give it our best. I think that is super important, right? Because otherwise what ends up happening is that you don't want any, and it's especially important amongst co-founders, to align very closely with each other. Because like I mentioned, the culture starts from the top, trust starts from the top, right? Behaviors are mimicked from the top. So I think operational excellence is envisioned from the top, right? So I think super important to commit, even if you disagree.
All right. I think last question now, Naiyya, and this is Kavita N from Geojit from Bangalore. How do we fear of failure during the worst phase of our business or startup journey?
I mean, it's real, Pankaj. I mean, it's not something that, all of us face it, and it could be more existential fear of failure. It could be more project-based fear of failure. It could be an individual personal fear of failure. Like, am I failing what I had set out to achieve for myself or for my team, right? Or for my stakeholders, right? So different levels. I think you have to live with it. It's part of who we are as entrepreneurs. It is that beta that basically gives us a disproportionate return, right? The reason we become entrepreneurs is because we believe in things that have a higher risk of failure than normal. And I think what we have to do, therefore, to combat this constant everyday, not just fear of failure, but also cynicism and judgment, is to remain mentally very, very strong. The way I end up doing it is I take out that time, like I mentioned to you earlier, for myself. I also take out that time with my family and with people who I know will not judge me for what I'm doing at work, are looking at me and have known me for multiple years as my individual person. And, I think it's important to recall who you really are as an individual, not just a professional. So I think just keeping yourself balanced and keeping yourself surrounded and making the time out for yourself and for the people who know you for more than what you are at work. But fear of failure is real. Huh? So I think it's part of what we have to all deal with as entrepreneurs. Nothing new there.
All right. Naiyya Saggi, what a pleasure. And what an immense landscape you've traversed in responding to so many different sorts of questions. But I'm sure it's making a difference because everyone needs to hear from someone who's been there, done that, and maybe who can show some sense of direction and feel hope that their entrepreneurial journey even though it may be riddled with pitfalls, success will come, and that they have to, just go ahead on the path. But having said that, we wish you and your group all the success. Thank you so very much for speaking with us and for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Meloni, and thank you to everybody who dialed in for this. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Naiyya. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is the end of this career talk, but we have many more lined up. So do stay tuned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.